Hey guys, it's Jay, here with another review video. Before the review begins, I'd like to ask if you enjoy the video, leave a like and share with others. Without further ado, onto the vid. The episode begins with the former Titan asking the Ronin version of Shay who he is. She asks, "What is this and what did he do?" Trying to get his attention again, she calls out and says, "Hey, I'm talking to you," and again asks what Shay has done. Shay is then seen holding his weapon with his cybernetic arm, and we are then shown parallel images of the future and present versions of Shay holding Zahara. Chains then shoot out from Andrea and attach to Zahara. Shay simply stands there as Andrea looks towards him. She then says, "Pandora, seal release," as Zahara no longer belongs to them. The chains snap and Shay drops Zahara with her going inside his shadow. Mahalalel says he may have underestimated Shay as he brought Zahara under submission, and as he is, so too is the blade Shay's servant. He says Zahara is free to roam, yet she chooses to follow Shay, and that his shadow will be where she hides her light. He says Pandora's chains cause Zahara to be bound to Andrea's soul out of fear of it becoming free. But Andrea trusts Shay, therefore she has released the weapon and it now follows him. He adds that even the lost put faith in the fulfillment of Shay's calling, and says, "Do not fail them." Jose notes Zahara's real name and says Shay has a consistent one, and says he marvels at the fact she submitted to him. He says he's heard of what she can do, but Shay can barely contain his own chi, and he can feel Shay struggling to conceal it. He says a sharp blade is nothing in the hands of a child, and that Shay cannot wield her, nor the power he was given, and he adds that someone is going to die today. But Shay simply responds that it is no secret who. Jose scoffs and says Zahara will destroy Shay, and when he is in ruin, all he loves will soon follow. He adds that they will both reduce his place to rubble, but the difference between Shay and him is that Jose welcomes the rebirth. A large purple orb then completely surrounds him. Inside the orb, Jose says this is the cursed beauty of his talent, that he can cause all that he destroys to be reborn, except for life itself. And as he looks at a picture of a boy, he then says, "To think, my own hands put out your light. Your memory should be joyous to me, but it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth." He says he will ensure they all drink from the same cup, and that they will know destruction with no hope. Shay looks onward at the large orb, and as it begins to fade, a transformed Jose begins to say, "Renacimiento, as I destroy my body, the void will create anew," as he unveils his hide of rebirth. Mahalalel says Jose is remarkable, and that he has hidden enough chi to fill a void, and that is truly great power. He then asks Shay if they should reveal theirs. Shay then extends his hand, and Zahara appears out of Shay's shadow and into his hand's grasp. A pillar of fire then erupts from Shay. As gold armor and flames slowly cover Shay, Mahalalel says marvelous, and that they have been honored. Jose says he can feel it and that Shay is worthy to stand against his divine power, but this guarantees that he will fall. Mahalalel continues by saying that the drawback of this on Shay's body will be great, for even his eyes have not witnessed the Anointed War State, as we see Shay wielding Zahara with a golden version of his shield that matches his armor. Jose points his staff at Shay and says, "Let us see how sturdy your shield is," and a beam is then fired from it. Shay braces himself and blocks the blast, with it being deflected in the process. Jose then lifts himself into the air, telling Shay to come, so they can burn it all down, also saying to let them choke on their own blood and tears. Shay then propels towards Jose and reels his arm back before then performing a massive Ilios chariot wheel. Shay then charges in and stabs at Jose with Zahara, though this is blocked with his staff. Jose then forms many orbs and sends them in Shay's direction, as he tells him that he does nothing but delay, and that his shield will soon shatter, and that those he thought himself able to protect will be the very ones crying out against him, and when he is of no use to them, they will turn on him. And when that is all said and done, the good he accomplished won't be able to save a single life. He then shoots another beam in Shay's direction, though it misses Shay, and he glides past it with it grazing his shield. As Shay flies around Jose, Andrea looks upward at them. Commander Henley then runs towards and calls out to Andrea, saying that they came as soon as they, but he stops his sentence and says, "Good God," as he looks upward at the fight. Andrea tells him to stand his men down, as there is little to nothing they can do there, because the God tier's conflict is not for them to meddle with, as we see Shay bearing down on Jose. Now, onto the highlights. The thing I want to look at first is again the most compelling thing about the episode, with that being Shay and his new Anointed War State. This new War State encompasses the new design I mentioned Shay would have in my Heart Clan discussion video, and the word anointed as well as the gold that comes with this state add greatly to this form's meaning. Before we look at the gold of the Anointed War State, I would like to quickly note something. Every time Shay uses his state, flames and fire encompass his very being. We also see at the end of Season 2, when Shay summons his shield and helmet, they seem to manifest out of fire. The Anointed War State State almost takes this to another level, as when the gold armor forms around him, it's almost as if it's being burned over him. Keeping this in mind, let's look at a verse from the Bible. Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 27 says, "I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him." This verse, in my opinion, sort of encapsulates what the Anointed War State looks like. However, this actual verse is in regards to the likeness of the Lord, which leads me into why the gold of the armor is important, as it represents the divine glory Shay has. Divine glory can be seen as the majesty, splendor, and holiness of God, and it is the manifestation of God's presence and character. Now, throughout scripture, God's glory is portrayed as something radiant and awe-inspiring. And when the Anointed War State is shown, those same things are captured on the panel, which means the Anointed War State and the gold that makes up its armor reflects God's presence in Shay. Moving on, I am of the opinion that the Anointed War State is something Shay can only achieve while he's using Zahara. Zahara is a talent-boosting talent weapon, which we have seen with its writer host, so it makes sense to me that it is also boosting the state aspect of Shay's talent. And there is one thing that supports why I think this. Ilios himself says even his eyes have not witnessed this war state, which is a direct contrast to the first time Shay uses the war state last season, where Ilios says he will grant Shay a power no mortal has ever seen. He also tells Shay that this is the highest form he can achieve, which means war state was something he and only he knew of, as he is not mortal, and therefore has seen it. And what he tells Shay greatly affirms that he has been aware of this form for some time. So for Ilios to not have seen this new war state himself means it is something he wasn't aware of until this very moment. Shay also directly summons Zahara right before he activates his state, which to me feels like he did so to amplify his state's power and what it is capable of. This plays into the anointed nature of the state, as the term anointed in the Bible signifies a person or object consecrated for a special purpose, often involving the use of oil, and symbolizes God's blessing, authority, and empowerment. These things apply to Shay pretty clearly, as he has been blessed by God in many ways, as I mentioned in my last video. And in this current situation, he is being empowered to a high extent by one of God's angels. Zahara asked for this empowerment through her talent amplifying capabilities, and because she is an object made to aid Shay, and she was given that purpose by God. So Shay, who was chosen by God to fulfill a purpose, while also using a weapon that was given a purpose by God, leads to Shay in this higher form he has achieved to be anointed, which is a callback to episode 117, when Shay prayed to God about letting his power be exposed. Next, let's take a closer look at Zahara. Now, Mahalalel tells Shay that Zahara will hide her light in his shadow, which simply means the weapon will stay within Shay's shadow until he summons her. This is of course an ability Zahara innately possesses, and we have seen it twice before, both times with Andrea. The first is in episode 79, and the second is in episode 123. In episode 79, Andrea specifically says that Zahara is a Naginata that hides within the shadow of its chosen vessel. Now, as I outlined in my last video, and it was very clearly expressed in the last episode, that Shay broke the curse Zahara had, and this is why Mahalalel tells Shay Zahara is now free to roam, sort of implying it can go anywhere it desires, but this could just as easily mean she is free to pick who she wants to wield her. But as Mahalalel also says, she has chosen to follow Shay. This is also why the color of the glow changes, as Brent himself noted in the comments that Noragiri's purple glow was replaced with red because it didn't possess Shay, Shay possessed it. This could mean that anyone who wields the weapon will have a color that reflects their talent imbued into her glowing effects, though this could also mean that the one who has clear ownership of her and who she chooses to follow will have the color of their talent imbued into her glowing effects. And based on what Brent said, I do feel as though that is the more accurate interpretation. Brent also cleared up that she isn't a fire-based talent weapon, but that she's an enhancing type talent weapon, and that she boosts whatever the wielder's talent is. I can see where the confusion regarding that may have come from, as I myself thought the same thing when reading the last episode, based on some of Shay's dialogue, and how her name means shine or brightness, which is what fire tends to do. However, I do think her name is supposed to represent her talent enhancing ability, and how the one who uses her, their talent would then shine ever more through her. The next thing I want to look at is something Mahalalel says in regards to Andrea. He says Pandora's chains cause Zahara to be bound to Andrea's soul. This is partially something Brent mentioned a really long time ago on the Discord. When answering a question regarding if her weapons are alive, he says she splits her soul into all of her weapons, and that's why they have a strange of weight and personality. He then specifies that she can do this due to Pandora's chest. This adds to the overall of what Pandora's chest can do, with it being a chest which possesses an endless interior, and the owner is bound to the chest as the only one who can summon its contents. The owner being bound to the chest also binds any weapon sealed inside to the owner, with them also being able to put part of their soul into the weapon. Now, Brent also specifies that Andrea doesn't split all of her soul into a weapon, and based on what he said, she can only split her soul into a certain number of weapons, or she can only split a certain amount of her soul into the weapons. Regardless of which one you think it is, I feel that the application of her soul in the weapons is why the full-scale technique is possible. Now, Andrea's talent is known as Weapon Mastery, and it gives her the ability to instantly master all combat techniques associated with any martial weapon she comes into contact with. Andrea's talent explains why she is a very capable combatant, and was even able to best Goro in pure-bladed combat, even with a slow weapon like Alistair. However, her talent doesn't directly explain how she is able to use the full-scale technique. The original theory is that Andrea's talent works differently with talent weapons, so when she comes into contact with a talent weapon, she instantly masters all things relating to it, and that the pinnacle of talent weapon mastery is the full-scale technique. However, I now think the full-scale technique comes as a result of how much of her soul is put into the current weapon she is wielding. This would explain why a character like Bjorn, who probably used Vinter for many years and would be considered a master of it, never showcases any full-scale ability of his own. The full-scale technique also seems to amplify what the weapon could do at a base, such as Muramasa being able to send out a larger insurrection wave than we've seen it send out when it's being used at a base level. The full-scale also seems to provide more techniques as well, such as the Bleeding Dance with Elliot, or the Water Spear with Muramasa, and we could see this as being possible due to Andrea now knowing more of what the weapon can do due to more of her soul being a part of it. I'd also like to add that Andrea, when using Ettore Jero, never gains a scale sleeve like how she has with all of her other weapons. And this to me implies she isn't putting much or any of her soul into the weapon, as at this point it has been a very consistent thing with every one of the weapons she touches. And lastly, let's take a look at Jose. Now, Jose's talent was essentially told to us to be of the high type, which is something I wouldn't have guessed, as like I said in my episode 121 review, I would have expected this talent to be a state or power type. There is a way I can make sense of it being a high type though. From the high types we have seen, the hides themselves appear as a second layer of skin, such as with Bjorn in the Immortal Hide, or with Tevin in Rhino Hide. But with Tevin in his Lion Hide, it takes on a more transformation-like appearance. However, it is still a hide, as he can deform the head as if he were taking off a helmet. And all these examples relate to the hide type's description, which is a chi form shell that covers the user's body. Bjorn and Tevin with their Immortal Hide and Rhino Hides respectively are examples of the first thing a hide type can do, which is to protect the Kimyo. For the Immortal Hide, it is by way of preventing all fatal injury, and for the Rhino Hide, it is by way of having a naturally high and adaptable durability. Now, for Tevin's Lion Hide and his Hammer Hide, the second thing a hide can do is more present. For Lion Hide, that is by way of giving Tevin more overall power, and for Hammer Hide, that is by giving him literal hammer pistons on his arms. Jose's hide actually applies the same sort of logic the Hammer Hide does for how it is a hide. First, before Jose is seen with his hide donned, he surrounds himself in a dome made from one of his purple orbs. This initial step could be seen as the chi form shell that covers the user, as that's practically what it is and what it is doing. When we see the actual visual of his hide, he now has a staff, as well as the orange and purple glow on his legs. The staff is a completely new thing, and it allows him to now shoot his orbs in a laser-like fashion, which he wasn't doing before. The glow of his arms and his legs and base can now be considered to be a partial use of his hide, which we have seen Bjorn do against Shay, like how I showed earlier, and we have seen Tevin do this not only with an incomplete hammer hide, but even as a kid as well. So while Jose's talent may look like it would be another type, when we look a little closer, we can see it operates similar to other hide types we have seen. And if we can make sense of how it fits into said category, there's no need to consider it another type. There also could be things shown later on that continue to add to the new attributes the hide grants. This may even apply to the overall rebirth theme that the talent has. To end things off, I want to say I'm happy the vision the Titan had of Shay related to Shay's eventual use of Norgiri, and I enjoy when Brent does the future to present or present to future scene change, where the character is in a similar pose or placement to the other version of themselves. This episode does showcase one of the things I dislike that Brent does though, and it's where he will introduce a character while showing off their talent's abilities, but does not give us a talent description. He shows us Lath about to fight and gives us his description, and adds onto it later with context in the story, but with Jose, we only got the name of his talent. and now we have a broader look of what it can do with his hide related transformation, but no description. Maybe we'll get a description regarding it at some point, but if we don't, this episode had the perfect moment for it. And lastly, Andrea essentially tells us that Shay is on the level of a god tier character, and this leads me to wonder how many other Gaki-like characters we'll see the others face off against, as well as what Shay's official rank is. Considering his now confirmed god tier level strength, he has to be stronger than Grimbor, who is ranked 21. And since I said he was originally hand level in my episode 114 review, that could be very literal, and Shay could very well be an unofficial hand like his grandfather, since I don't see him being directly assigned to any of the god tier based on him being a member of the first table. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what your favorite part of the chapter was in the comments below, as well as how you feel about the things I mentioned in the highlight section. Don't forget to read the actual episode for yourself, and be sure to like it as well, and I will see y'all in the next one.